A lot of you know I work in the motion picture business, and I see a lot of things through the viewfinder of a camera. So when I'm writing, in a way, I'm kind of seeing the scene in my head while I'm writing it. So I'm trying to write in a way that's sort of like if you were watching something, you might see something like that. So that's kind of how I approach it. And I'd like to open up to questions if people have any questions. I can tell you a little bit about writing the book and what it's like to be a writer as opposed to being a cameraman. Being a cameraman, you drag around about 900 pounds of gear with you everywhere you go, right? And as a writer, all I need is my laptop, which is wonderful. So it's very freeing, very liberating not to have a lot of equipment around when you're trying to create something. And I don't know what it would cost to film a scene like that, but I'd say maybe $5,000 or $10,000, maybe more if you had really good actors in it. But it costs very little to write a scene like that, and so I kind of like that. Yeah, and I see a hand up in the back. All right, the first question was, how do I get my ideas? They're emailed to me monthly from a place in Duluth. And then, do I use an outline? Not having an outline kept me from writing this book a couple of years, I think, because I felt like I should have an outline before I wrote the book. And I really would have, but I was sick that day, so I didn't have time to write the outline. And after some time went by, I realized I'm using the fact that I don't have an outline to keep me from writing this book. So I decided I was going to start writing it anyway. I also, at the same time, read a great book by mystery writer Lawrence Block, who's written 3 or 4 books on fiction writing. They're excellent books. And in one of these books, he said that the fact that I've read all these mysteries, he says if you've read a lot of mystery stories, then without meaning to, you've already programmed yourself to write a mystery story. So just sit down and do it. I also think that you're either going to spend the time figuring out the outline before you start writing the book, or you're going to spend the time figuring out what happens next after you start writing the book. So either way, you're going to be in front of a blank screen trying to figure out what comes next. So it's just sort of your choice, what you feel more comfortable with, doing it before or doing it after. So I hope that answers your question. Let's just throw it open to questions. And there's a microphone up front. I think they would like it if you use the microphone. Thanks. Hi, Susan.
I wanted to know what kind of research you did for the book. What kind of research you think is necessary for writing fiction.
Well, this was a huge drag for me about research because, I was getting into this racket because I thought it would be easy. I didn't think I had to do any work, I mean, I was working already in my business. So, the question of research came up. And while I was writing this, the Washington Post was running a series of articles about Brianna Blackman, who was a small girl who died. She was in DC foster care. Her foster parent was taking very good care of her. Her biological parents came at the very last moment, took her back, and 2 weeks later she was dead. And so I got the chance to read all those articles and also to talk with the Washington Post reporters, Sari Horwitz and Scott Hyam, about that. So that was part of the research with them. Also, a very good friend of mine whose name is Patty Zubek-Means gave me a lot of background on juvenile institutions of that time. She also introduced me to a policeman, Peter Banks, who now is with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And Peter gave me a lot of background. When Patty introduced me to Peter, he said, here's a cop you have to meet. He arrested me like a dozen times. And then Peter said, no, it was really only 3 or 4 times. And so Peter gave me a lot of good background, too. So there's probably some other stuff I'm not thinking of. But all the people that I talked to also gave me the names of other people to talk to. So there's a lot of people that I spoke to in the course of writing this. Yes. And another question? Yes, there's a question back there. The question is, he's reading about DC and the streets and directions and stuff, but there's some places in the book that don't actually exist. There's one place called the Zamboanga Cafe, which did exist in Los Angeles in the 1970s, which is when I was a frequent customer. And I just sort of picked it up and moved it into Washington, because I think Washington needs a place like the Zamboanga. I mean, there's nothing like the Zamboanga Cafe in DC. So that would be an example of something that some of the clubs are, like there's a jazz club that doesn't actually exist in DC, but I've been to a lot of jazz clubs. And jazz music has a lot to do with this story, too. One of the questions that someone asked me the other day was, where did the name Willis Skidney come from? And when I was growing up in Cleveland, I was studying jazz bass, and my bass teacher was this great teacher. His name was Willis Lyman. And my best friend was taking piano lessons from a jazz pianist named Bill Gidney. So I had Willis Lyman and Bill Gidney, and I just sort of fused their names together to get the name of the private eye, and that's where he comes from. Yeah. Here's a question here.
Who are your favorite mystery writers other than you?
Well, I'm not my favorite mystery writer, so no. Who are my favorite mystery writers? Well, the late Donald Westlake certainly is one of my very favorites, and Lawrence Block is a big favorite. I think one of the best mystery writers anywhere lives in the D.C. area, and that's George Pelecanos. I also think that another great writer in the D.C. area is Edward P. Jones, who I like a lot. He's not a mystery writer, but a great writer. And so Washington's got two amazing writers here. There's also Louis Bayard, who writes historical mysteries. I like his stuff a lot. And there's a lot. We're sort of living in a golden age of mystery writing right now. And there's a lot of good people out there. So on the one hand, it's great because there's a lot of great stuff to read. On the other hand, it's a very crowded field. So getting a private eye novel out there is difficult to do. And I was just really happy that St. Martin's Press liked it enough to want to print it. Yeah. And here's a question here. When the movie gets made, why are we doing the music? No. No, because we would want the movie to succeed. That would preclude me being part of the soundtrack. So yeah, probably the less I have to do with it, the better the movie would be. Yes, Robert. Well, it is difficult to come up with names of characters. And I sort of go into the Ross Thomas school of naming characters, which is I have a hard time remembering who everyone is in the novel that I'm writing. So I want to give them a name that I can remember. So that's what I try to do in the book. Some of the character names I had in mind before I began writing, and others I made up as I went along, and some others I went back and changed. So it just depends. Yes. There's a question there.
Is this going to be a series?
Is it going to be a series? Gosh, I hope so. That would be nice. The second book is written, and St. Martin's Press has read it, and they like it. The second book is called Son of an Elephant, and it's the same private eye, and a lot of the same people are in it. And just the other day, my agent talked to St. Martin's, and they said, well, we want to see how Drink the Tea does. So if this book does well, there'll be another one hopefully in about a year from now.